It is the BJ Show. I am Brad. That is John. John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. Good morning to you, John. How you doing?
I'm good. How about you, Brad?
Just great. I spelled the name because you need to write that into your computer, type it into your computer, put it into your laptop, put it into your smartphone, iPhone, Android, whatever you have, JOHNCOMBEST.com. That'll get you to John Combest's website, which he's done for 23 plus years, never missed a single day. It's like the Matt Drudge of Missouri. All the important stuff you should know about, and some things you probably shouldn't know about, but will probably make you mad, right? You always include those.
Or it might inspire you, Brad. You know, in the case of St. Louis City grants, it might inspire you to get some of that Rams money, set up a sham business, and score some Rams settlement money.
Can you still believe no money for public safety? Is that crazy or what? Okay. Unbelievable.
We'll talk about that in one of the top three today, Brad.
John, let me just start off by saying one thing. Can you imagine if they talk about the city police department being taken over by the state again? There was the famous picture, I don't know if you saw that or not, of your buddy, what's his name, Schrader? What's his name, Schrader again?
Schroederegger. Yeah, that's the way you pronounce it, also known as Nick Schroer.
Have you seen the Nick Schrader picture with him on the microphone, and in the background over his shoulder you can see, or in front of him, you can see Mayor Tish in front of him? Did you see that picture?
I don't know. Maybe I have a link up to it today, and it's story number 2.
I bet you do. Anyway, what I was going to say was, with what we've seen happen over the past 72 hours since Trump got in office, can you imagine if Trump took the city over? Can you imagine that? I mean, can you imagine all of a sudden they'd find snowplows come on out of the wing-wang, and crime would be gone, and all the illegals will be gone? Wouldn't that be something, John?
And there wouldn't be a Delmar divide anymore. There'd be a Doge divide.
Right. We start off with this guy right here. What's your name again, sir? Hold on a minute. I got to do this again. What's your name again, sir?
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what do you do?
We're on our way to the number one.
And we start off with?
In third place.
2 crazy events happened yesterday in St. Charles County, Brad. The first one is one that was brought to my attention by you because it's the first time it has ever happened. A St. Louis public radio employee crossed a bridge and went into St. Charles County. Can you believe that, Brad?
Give me a break. Really?
Yeah, and by the way, the employee's name is not Jason Rosenbaum. It's a woman named Kate Grumke, and she is officially, let me make sure we get her title correct, she is the Environment, Climate, and Agriculture reporter for St. Louis Public Radio. She actually does a pretty good job, jokes aside. But the headline is, Residents Blast AmerenMissouri Rate Increase at St. Charles Meeting. Now, we talked about this early last week, Brad, how Ameren had set up some public hearings, or excuse me, let me correct myself. The Missouri Public Service Commission had set up some public meetings where folks could come out and talk about the Ameren rate hike. And Brad, you brought up a good point, which is, you ever think anybody shows up to a meeting and just says, hey, I'd love to have some higher rates. I'm happy to pay a little bit more. No. Well, according to Kate Grumke, none of those type of people showed up yesterday, Brad, if you can believe it or not. But there were about 15 people. Kate Grumke says more than a dozen came out to speak against the electricity rate hike. You had a woman who said that it would have a ripple effect, driving up the costs of other bills and driving up the costs for businesses, pretty much what you would expect. And then a gentleman from AmerenMissouri, the regulatory VP, a guy named Warren Wood, he's frequently quoted in these things. And he says that, quote, we're hardening the grid, replacing old power lines, strengthening poles, upgrading substations, et cetera, et cetera. What I love about this language is I know that the good folks in communication at Ameren have so much focus group data that shows you don't say we're improving the grid. You say we're hardening the grid. You don't say that we're putting in new poles. You say we're strengthening poles. So this is a formality, Brad. And, the Public Service Commission has to go through this, and they have to consider testimony real carefully before they give Ameren what they want, which is a 15% rate increase. So it'll bring about $446 million into Ameren, this rate increase will.
John, Where do I start with this? Where do I
Where
start
do
with
you
this?
start, Brad?
You know this is just a dog and pony show. You know they're going to get their rate increase, and all these people that showed up, God bless them, but they wasted their time because, it's going to get kablunk. You know what that sound is? Kablunk, that's the rubber stamp hitting approved on the rate increase. And, the crazy thing about this is one of my stupid anecdotes, which you love so much, which I give you, like my old-timey kind of stuff. Years ago, I put together this little publication, and it was sort of like, one of the things we did was it featured a small town, and it featured pictures of buildings that were over 100 years old and that same building today. And it was sort of interesting because some of the pictures, and I went to the Historical Society and got these pictures from the Washmo Historical Society and got these pictures of buildings that were built, most of them were built like in the 1800s, and they were still standing today. And I took pictures of them. I took the pictures of them as they are today and then took the picture of them as they were like 1890, 1901, stuff like that. The amazing thing was almost everything had changed except for one thing. You know what that one thing was?
I don't have any idea.
Still a telephone pole with wires on it. And you'd think that in 100
Wow.
you'd think that in 100 years they'd figure out a better way of getting electricity. And one of my favorite things, I'm going to start taking pictures of this, is people give grief to, and this is always cracks me up. There's a place in Washmo. Everybody talks about the fact that, if you put a tower up, it ruins the view. Okay, drive down any major street in St. Louis County, St. Charles County, St. Louis City, and you may see a cell phone tower every couple miles. But what do you see every couple 100 feet? A stupid electric pole. And the interesting thing is, there's some of them that look like they're going to fall over. There's one at Page and Warson. I'm going to take a picture of this and start posting this. That's probably leaning at probably about a 20-degree angle. Okay? Why don't they fix that? You know what I'm saying? They don't have any money right now. They need a rate increase to fix that?
Yeah, Brad, I think you just made the argument for an Ameren rate increase. Way to go.
So that's the story that if you're married and you want a new car and you come home to your wife, you go, oh my God, listen how bad my car sounds. And you make sure that you put a couple, tennis shoes in the engine compartment that flop around and stuff like that. Oh my God, and look at the tires are flat. And oh, look at, there's a rip in the seat. I need a new car. Is that the same kind of motivation is what you do for that?
Well, I mean, I just think that if you're against hardening the grid, Brad, you're against hardening the grid. And the fact is, most men your age are, anyway. Yeah, I would think that you'd be for strengthening poles, Brad.
The bizarre part of that is, if they wanted to harden the grid, they'd put it all underground.
Yes, which would be expensive, right, Brad?
Right, but that would be ultimately hardening the grid. And why is it that? Well, I won't go into my complaints about Ameren. When we had the studio in Washmo, our electricity would go out probably about every third week, and it was a tree that would hit one of the power lines and would blow the circuit breaker, and it took 3 or 4 hours for the guy to show up and reset the breaker. Why don't they just chop down the damn trees? You know what I'm saying?
Well, we know that you hate trees and parks, Brad. I mean,
do.
you're just winning friends in the conservation community.
We ready for number 2?
We sure are.
Which John has already foreshadowed.
Up a notch to number 2.
As teased by the great Brad Hildebrand, not only is there a terrific story in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch today, which is authored by Jack Suntrup, and by terrific, I mean detailed, there's also a terrific photo, Brad, which was captured by Christian Gooden of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and it shows Senator Nick Schroer giving some testimony, talking about his bill to bring the control of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department under state control. And there is Tishaura Jones over Nick Schroer's proverbial shoulder or elbow, making a face. And Tishaura is not gonna have it. It's a terrific photo, Brad. I'm glad you saw that because it really tells the whole story. And Brad, I think it's probably pretty well worn on our show. We've talked about state control of the police department. For her part, Tishaura Jones points to Kansas City and says, look, Kansas City's police has been under state control for a while, and it's not going so well. Why are you taking our local control away from us? And Brad, I'd also point to the fact Scott Fawn and Jake Croson and Kelton Turner talk about this on the midweek update quite a bit. They talked about it yesterday. If you're living in a city like Defiance, or you're living in a city like Columbia, Missouri, and you want local control, you wouldn't want people from Jefferson City coming in and saying that they should be in charge of your police department. So Republicans have a tightrope to walk here, Brad. Are we for local control or are we not for local control?
Are you asking me my own opinion?
No, I'm asking the rhetorical question, but I would like to hear your opinion on it, Brad.
I think the local control thing is important. I do think that that's government overreach, and I think it's Nick Schrader should be admonished for that. I really do.
and also John Schneider, who's not only with Central Fire, but he's also a member of the Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, we want all law enforcement and fire department to be under local control, Brad. So we'll continue to see this fight, and as the debate goes, if you're Mike Kehoe, you got that honeymoon period, you got political capital early on. Are you going to use it for something like local control and crime, or are you going to use it for other things? St. Louis City's not going to go down without a fight. That's all. Talking
about local control, have you heard the latest Trump thing?
I have not, no.
He wants to get rid of FEMA. He says that the states, most of the states, and they do. Missouri has SEMA.
Yeah, we do have SEMA. You're right.
SEMA, and he said that FEMA gets in the way of the states, and that the federal government's job should just be to support monetarily the local state organizations, and we don't need a FEMA. What do you think about that one?
Well, I think that if you're at the Department of Public Safety here in Missouri, you would love to get, I don't know, $100 million or more, to do your own thing. It would take some time to ramp up those efforts. But yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that if you're a liberal or you're a Democrat, you hate it because you want as much centralized control as possible and federal money going to that stuff.
Sad but true. Okay, number one.
The number one.
Brad, paradoxically and unknowingly, you just led into story number one when we talk about what should be the responsibility of the state versus what should be the responsibility of the federal government. One of the many topics on which you were an expert, Brad, the Westlake landfill, and specifically next to it, the Bridgeton landfill. The Missouri Department of Natural Resources is asking the EPA to assume oversight of the Bridgeton landfill. Now, Brad, you're way more of an expert on this than I am, and I'll need you to keep me honest, so to speak here. But the federal government is now in charge of cleanup at the Westlake landfill. And DNR says, look, you guys are expanding some of your scope of Westlake landfill. You guys should expand that to include the Bridgeton landfill too, because we believe, we being the Missouri DNR, we believe there is a high likelihood that there is radioactive contamination in a smoldering landfill, aka the Bridgeton landfill. Now, for their part, Brad, and I'll add this, and then I want your thoughts on this. Republic Services says there's no evidence that there's any radioactive material in the Bridgeton landfill anywhere, and DNR doesn't seem to, as of this writing. And by the way, the story is brought to us by Allison Kite. She's a content creator at the Missouri Independent, the progressive blog, and for DNR's part, they haven't provided any more evidence to the EPA about how they seem to know that there is radioactive material in the Bridgeton landfill. What do you think about this, Brad? You know a lot about this.
Well, I don't know a lot about it. I read a lot about it, and I've been a NOCO guy for a long time, and this is something that all of us NOCO people. Matter of fact, I just did you see that picture I sent you the other day of the I
did yesterday of McDonald Boulevard. Yeah.
Yes, right. And I've already had a fight with someone over this, which I said that there was no bridge, there was a culvert, and they essentially said tomato, tomato. Once again, I'm the son of a civil engineer, and if I were to dare call a culvert a bridge, my father would have admonished me, because there is a huge difference between a culvert and a bridge. But no, going back to this thing, and the whole thing is sad. The whole thing is sad that now we have finger pointing going on. The whole thing the sad about this is, to me, this is federal government's deal, because trace it back to the roots. This was the Manhattan Project in the early to mid 40s, where we're building the 1940s. We're building the nuclear bomb. They were refining uranium in downtown St. Louis. Mallinckrodt Chemical Company did this. This should still be the federal government's deal. I mean, the state didn't make nuclear bombs. This was the federal government, right? So
yeah, I mean, it's hard to me. It's hard to argue against that, Brad. Now, I guess if you're the EPA, I guess you can't expand the scope of Westlake until somebody shows you evidence somehow that there's radioactive material at Bridgeton. So if I'm at the EPA, I'm like, cool, maybe this fits, but why are you telling us this? Like, what evidence do you have for this?
John, you and I, if let's say we were like billionaires and we decided that, hey, let's stop this finger pointing, and we called the best nuclear testing company in the country. We find out who that is, and we said, hey, what's it going to cost for you to come to St. Louis and check out these two areas, this Westlake dump and the Bridgeton dump, and tell us what you think. I mean, and they'd say, well, it's going to cost $10 million. Can you be here Tuesday?
Yes, it would be done right away.
Right. It would be done, taken care of. They would come back and say, well, we've done our extensive reports, and Brad and John, here's our results after doing all the, okay, fine. But it's like the Janus school thing. You know what I mean? If you know that whole crazy story. And it's like the story we had, what was it, last year, where I was even somewhat shocked by this, and I still have to figure out where that's at, up in Florissant or Hazelwood, these relatively new homes that were built on top of fill that was overflow from it used to be floodplain of the Coldwater Creek, and they filled the area in and they built houses on it, and they're drilling holes in people's basements and finding radioactivity in people's basements. When does it stop? But yet, what does the state do? Remember, you covered that, John. Was that late last year? What did the state do? I mean, not the state. What did the feds do? What was the big thing they did? Remember, we talked about this?
Yeah, they put up some signs.
Yes, they put up some signs.
They said no. They said, do not disturb the soil.
Right. They put up some signs along the banks of Coldwater Creek, essentially saying, do not disturb the soil. Yeah, like that's going to help, right? Hey, kids, you want to go? It's summertime. Let's go down and splash around in Coldwater Creek. Don't pay any attention to those signs. As long as we don't disturb the dirt, we'll be just fine, right?
It's remarkable, Brad.
Oh, man. Okay. I was going to say something. I can't remember what I was going to say. That's what happens when you get to be, I'm pushing 90.
Were you going to point out, and I sent you a Mark Maxwell tweet today, Brad, as a follow-up to something we've talked about now. This is the third time in 2 weeks. Tishaura Jones was outraised in this most recent reporting period by her opponent, Cara Spencer. So the challenger outraised the incumbent in this last period.
John, let's talk about this beginning a B block. Okay. I have my solution, what Tishaura Jones should do, but she would never do it. And I say there's 3 things that she could turn this election around, because
I want to hear it.
I don't think things are looking good for her. Do you? Do you think she's fighting an uphill battle at this point in time?
I think she's probably bottomed out. I think the snowpocalypse was the bottom. And I think if you're handing out a ton of candy, AKA Ram settlement money, to people, you might want to encourage them to take part in the democratic process, wouldn't you, Brad? Why don't, if you want to be part of this North City solution, maybe you should take part in the democratic process and contribute to political campaigns. I don't know. That's what I would be suggesting.
Yeah, but you're a political guy. You'd always suggest that. Okay, we have to take a break.